Thank you. So by participating, we appreciate your agreement to be recorded. We will be providing this on the city website maybe as soon as tomorrow under the project page. Laura, do you want to take it from here and talk through some of the other logistics?
Yes, thank you. All right, so this is just to give an overview of how to use the interface on WebEx in order to participate this evening. If you are on a computer and you have a question or a comment, you can open up your participants page, or excuse me, participants window or Q&A window. The participants window will allow you to raise your hand. There's a very tiny hand icon that is next to your name. That will notify me, the moderator, that we have a hand raised. In general, we are asking that hand raises, questions happen during kind of our Q&A portion of the time. But if you have a question, we can immediately, if you'd like to get that out, you can type that into our Q&A window and we will read through those as well as the hand raises during our Q&A session. If you are joining us over your phone, the way to access is those same options is to open the options button, which has 3 dots at the bottom of your screen. And you can either click raise hand or further down Q&A, select ask a question, and then type in your question or comment. And as mentioned, if you are joining us by phone, you won't be able to type in a comment, but *3 will enable you to raise a hand and verbally ask a question. Our goal this evening is to allow the developers to give you, our neighborhood, an update on the development proposal since last time that the neighborhood met, and then also talk about next steps within the proposal process. And up on your screen are just some general guidelines for public participation. We appreciate your patience this evening. Obviously, there are a lot of folks here, and meeting remotely is maybe a little bit more cumbersome, but as we're kind of moderating and figuring all of this out, we want to make sure we're hearing from all of you that want to speak. So appreciate your understanding in that. And that's all I have, Sean.
All right. I think with that, we'll move on to the second part, which is, I believe we talked about having the developer begin with a presentation that would just introduce their firm and the project.
Yes, Sean, that'd be great. Thank you. So I'm Alex Bazans. I'm a development partner with Real Estate Equities. So I just want to kind of kick off with a quick presentation. It's kind of similar to the last time's meeting where we just did a PowerPoint and kind of went through some slides. I just provide some background on our company, on some background on the project. So I think Blaine here is going to try to help me pull up the PowerPoint, and we'll kind of go through it here just to kick this off. So the first page, at this point, we're just referring to it as the Wooddale Avenue Apartments. This is a rendering of the proposed building that you guys saw last time. Again, we're proposing a 4-story that's tiered down to a 3-story building along the longer leg of the building that goes along Highway 100. Next slide. Just a real quick background on the company. So Real Estate Equities has been around since 1972. We're based in St. Paul, Minnesota. We own and manage a little over 4,000 apartment units. Our properties are primarily in the Twin Cities, but we're also in Rochester, Indiana, Wisconsin, and now we're just expanding into the Arizona market. We self-manage all the properties that we own, and we tend to own property long-term, and we fully plan to manage this property as well. This just gives you an example that was shown last time of some recent development projects that we've done. This shows you kind of a representation, I think, of some of the finish levels that we're doing in our projects. Spring House is 168 units in Coon Rapids that was finished within the last year. Eastgate is a workforce housing project that's 135 units in Rochester. Sonder House is 127 units in Brooklyn Center. And the Winslow is a 172 unit project in West St. Paul. That's actually a senior affordable project. So we wanted to just kind of show this as a representation, more so of just the common areas and some of the finish levels that we're doing in our projects. Next. Again, this is two different kind of views of the renderings, one of the 4-story and one of the 3-story leg of the building. Proposed density and parking. So the unit mix has stayed the same in terms of total number of units at 114 units. The unit mix consists of 27 1-bedroom units, 53 2-bedroom units, and 34 3-bedroom units. Density is 30 units per acre. In terms of parking, we have a total of 205 parking spaces. 117 of those spaces are underground parking. 88 spaces are considered surface parking, and the parking ratio is 1.8 spaces per unit. Next. This page just kind of shows a comparison from the previous presentation that was done at the last neighborhood meeting. Again, the total number of units has stayed consistent with 114 units. The unit mix has shifted a little bit. The previous unit mix had 31 bedrooms, 47 2-bedrooms, and 37 3-bedrooms. The current unit mix has, again, 27 1-bedrooms, 53 2-bedrooms, and 34 3-bedroom units. Just to kind of highlight parking, I know we kind of went through this on one of the previous slides. Again, we have a total of 205 parking spaces, which amounts to a 1.8 parking ratio per unit, spaces per unit. The required parking per the city code, the required number of spaces is 184 spaces in total, with a parking ratio requirement of 1.61 spaces per unit. So we're actually exceeding the city's required parking spaces by 21 stalls in total. We feel like that is sufficient in terms of the amount of parking that'll be necessary for the project. Next. Just to highlight some of the sustainability requirements and features of the building. We fully intend to do solar panels on the roofs. We intend to have electric vehicle car charging stations throughout the property. We'll have Energy Star rated appliances and windows, high efficiency mechanical systems and low flow water fixtures, LED light fixtures, low VOC paints and adhesives, water efficient irrigation systems, native and climate appropriate plantings, as well as recycling and construction waste. These items will get further discussed and refined as we continue the design process with city staff and finalize the overall sustainability requirements for the project. This page just gives you a breakdown of the income restrictions for the property and the rent restrictions. So for one individual, the max income one can make is $44,100. For a family of 4, it's as high as $62,940. The max rent that we can charge for a 1-bedroom unit is $1,138. A 2-bedroom is $1,364. And a 3-bedroom max rent would be $1,572. The rented income restrictions are based on the 60% area median income, which is established every year by HUD. And with that, I think I'll kind of lead over to Sean. I know Sean's going to address any specific questions related to the access off of Wooddale and the site plan. So I'll pass it off to Sean.
Yeah, before we shift away, Alex, it looks like there's maybe one question in the Q&A. Is that related to the presentation?
Yes, so this is a comment from Paul Bodwin, who is the current pastor at Aldersgate Church. Just wanted to let the participants this evening know that he is available for any questions, as well as some other leaders from Aldersgate if that should come up. So thank you, Paul. We do have another question that just came in, wondering if the parking is free or fee. I assume meaning the parking included in the rental price per month, or if there's an additional fee.
So the surface parking will be free. The underground parking is charged a fee. So there definitely is a charge for underground parking.
Okay. So again, I'll introduce myself briefly. I'm Sean Walther, the planning manager. I know that one of the areas of interest in this meeting is going to be related to the traffic and access, which is we have some more information and some changes in that regard since the last neighborhood meeting. So I will just say that I'm going to focus specifically on traffic and access in this presentation. I don't have slides to show you. I'm just going to walk through some talking points. I'll share some staff initial reactions following the first neighborhood meeting, and also share some of staff's takeaways from the traffic study that was completed. But I won't be presenting the traffic study in detail. We will have the traffic consultant available at the public hearing, which is yet to be scheduled, but we're looking at kind of mid-March to early April for a public hearing before our planning commission, and we'll have the consultant available at that time. So I think some of the main points is that for both the neighborhood and certainly for staff, is that this site, absolutely makes sense for, for the multifamily to have access to the major road like Wooddale. And we definitely did not, in this development or any development on this site, want to recreate the cut-through traffic from outside the neighborhood that circumvents the cul-de-sac, like was previously possible with the church. And I want to also highlight that staff, of course, heard at the first neighborhood meeting that the neighborhood does not want an access to the south, and we heard references to the cut-through traffic that used to occur when people could cut through the church site. And staff also heard the concerns about safety and the capacity of the cul-de-sac on the north side, and some questions about the fire department and how that operates. So following the neighborhood meeting, I just want to highlight that staff kind of struggled with the neighborhood position on the access to the south. Basically, by preventing and blocking residents from this apartment building any vehicular access to the public street adjacent to this site, it just provides residents fewer options. It's certainly less convenient for people that are coming and going if their destination or origin is from the southwest. And it also is a little less convenient for those that are parked, in the garage on the south end of the garage. Staff shared that the neighbors' concerns and expectations of avoiding excessive traffic into the neighborhood. Still, we, even though we had those initial reactions, we did want to withhold our judgment, and until we had the traffic study completed. The traffic study is available on the city website for the project page. If you haven't seen it yet, you can dig into that. And staff requested in that study that we look at various alternatives for access. And ultimately, 3 options were produced. One with all the access to the north, one with all the access to the south, which was not really seriously considered. It was, I think, the consultant wanting to identify worst case. And then also a hybrid that showed the current, which is basically shown in the current plans that we saw tonight. That allows for the surface parking to only go to the north, and for the garage underneath the building to go to the north or the south. Our takeaways from the traffic study were that the roads and intersections out there are performing well. There weren't long delays. There wasn't a crash history that would, highlight a significant concern and raise alarm. And the overall level of service for all the intersections was essentially the highest and best rating of a level service A. The worst side street delays were level of service B or C, which equates to like a 10 to 16 second delay during the peak hours of the morning or the afternoon. So traffic from this development, after showing the various access options, all showed very little or no impact to the level of service of the intersections and the road capacity out there. I think the two pieces, though, that led to ultimately my decision to take the staff's input and direct the developer that our preference was to have a hybrid option, option C, which allowed access to the north and south from the garage, was that the resulting volumes onto the local streets really were not of concern from an operation standpoint. Basically, the largest increase, of course, would be on Cambridge, and that basically elevated the volumes to levels that are existing on Goodrich in the same neighborhood today. So we did not deem that to be excessive traffic, and it also wasn't cut-through traffic. It's serving residents of this future potential development that will be living in the neighborhood and provide some access. The last point I just want to share before I pause and see if there's any typed questions or people that want to ask questions specifically of me, is that I want to circle back to the question about the fire station. I will say that the fire department did not have any concerns about the cul-de-sac and the traffic that would be generated from this development. Part of it is they have, big trucks and lights and sirens, and they win, right? and they'll get to go where they need to go. But they did see some tactical advantage for having a garage access to the south in the event that they have to respond to an emergency or car fire to the garage. But again, it's not, I think this was not a major concern for them on the cul-de-sac, and that's ultimately what led us to this decision. It was not easy to go contrary and counter to the neighborhood's input on this particular item, but we believe that that was the best outcome for the development long run. So with that, Laura, are there any questions that are awaiting the traffic and access issue?
Currently, no questions about the traffic issue just now.
All right. Well, that really concludes the presentation. I think if you do have questions you'd like to voice, if you would virtually raise your hand, we can unmute you one at a time. And then also if you would ask, try to limit it to one question. We can circle back to you later, but we have 45 people currently on the call, and so please try to limit the time that you take for your question. Thank you.
All right. Well, while we're waiting on questions to come in, we did have a typed in question from Shannon asking about the affordability levels of the residents and wondering why 80% AMI affordability is not being considered for this project. Is there a reason to limit it? And
I can speak to that. So the project is being financed with tax exempt bonds and part of the 4% low income housing tax credit program. And the maximum rents, on average in that program are a maximum of 60% of the area median income. So we're right now proposing basically that 100% of the units are at or below 60% AMI, and are evaluating the potential for even having a couple of units that would be even lower rent levels. So.
all right, thank you. We have another question. This is for Sean. As far as what type of parking will be allowed on Wooddale Avenue south of the cul-de-sac? Any on-street parking?
Good question. Right now, we don't propose any specific restrictions beyond what's out there today. I believe parking is allowed on both sides of the street adjacent to the site. And so unless and until there were issues, we would not propose any changes to that. Typically, I believe the widths out there do allow for parking on both sides, so there's not a non-conforming condition out there. So that's the short answer. If there are issues that are generated by the development, there are opportunities for the city to explore other restrictions, either time restrictions or restricting parking on one side.
All right, and we were just notified that Council Member Sue Budd has also joined our conversation. So Sue, if you would like to introduce yourself, our other members, our council members have, see if I can unmute you real quick.
Hello, everyone. I apologize for being late. I had an earlier meeting that ran over, so I'm happy to join you and glad to be here. Thank you.
Thank you for
Councilmember
joining
Budd.
us.
Yeah, Councilmember Budd, thank you for joining us. And we just completed the presentation and are beginning some of the Q&A. Laura, it looks like Luke has his hand raised.
All right, Luke.
Hey there. I have a question regarding the other projects that are going on in the neighborhood. When you combine this project with, the Union Congregational down the street, and then potentially the Jessen Press project that I have no doubt will eventually be completed at some point in time. I don't know. I don't think I'm alone on this, but the whole dynamic of the neighborhood is completely getting washed away. With the light rail and everything else that's going in. I know you guys are trying to flood the neighborhood with apartments and access and all that. I just wanted to hear your input on what you think about that.
I think that's directed to me. So this is, again, Sean Walther, planning manager. Well, I'll highlight a couple things. First of all, yes, there's been a lot of development activity, and there are some projects that have been approved and are not yet constructed, including Union Congregational Church, as well as the Wooddale Station redevelopment. And the city does have a long-range comprehensive plan that has identified this area as, seeing additional growth. There's the opportunities certainly that someday the Burlington and Micro Center site could redevelop, although I think they still have some long-term leases on those that aren't necessarily going to go away. And to the point of the Jessen Press, it's been pretty quiet. As I said, they could come back any day and knock on the door and find out if that they have interest. And there's sites that may also be out there that we're not aware of. But what I would say is, in addition to the traffic study that was prepared, we did do an Elmwood traffic audit, which if you want to look at some of the development that's happened over the last few years and look at what is projected for development in our long range plan, it does have some of those numbers a little more easily digestible than you find in our comprehensive plan. And it relates specifically to your neighborhood. From a traffic perspective, we feel like it can be accommodated, but at the same time, I think I want to point out that this application for the Aldersgate church site is not something that the city necessarily anticipated or generated. It's an applicant-driven request to re-guide and rezone the property, and the conversation I've tailored to the traffic issues are based on this particular development. I don't know I hope that answered your question.
And Sean, we just had an additional comment in the Q&A supporting Luke's comment / question.
Well, I see he's raising his hand again. Maybe I wanted to, while you're going to unmute, I just want to add, I think I maybe missed the mark partly on your question, which was about kind of the character of the neighborhood, maybe. I would say that, the development, we've had a plan in place for the Elmwood neighborhood since 2003. And a lot of the development that's happened has been really following that plan. So it was guided growth. I think the two maybe not maybe surprises that weren't contemplated as being turning over were the Union Congregational Church site and the Aldersgate site. Those were not on the radar in 2003 as something that might change.
Right, I understand. Yeah, I completely understand what you're saying on that point. As far as like the zoning and whatnot, I mean, this project's far along now that it's not going to change, but I mean, I don't understand myself, and I think a lot of people in the neighborhood would agree with me that more townhouse style, less density would probably have been more appropriate given the footprint around the neighborhood. Obviously, it's a nice lot. And it's going to suit the needs of the apartment or whatever. But when you take into account the neighborhood and the traffic that's going to increase and the safety of the children, and once again, the characteristics of the neighborhood that are going away, it's no doubt. I mean, it's just definitely not going to be what it used to be, which is, things change obviously, but it doesn't have to change so drastically in one neighborhood just because it's, adjacent to the light rail, which I don't know, it'll be here in 2050, whatever. So yeah, I think it's inappropriate. It's just too much for this small stamp of an area. I mean, like you said earlier, once the micro center gets developed in the Burlington, 10 years or whatever, it's just going to be absolute insanity. So I don't know if anyone else wants to speak on that, but that's just my opinion.
Well, if you don't mind, I'll hazard a very brief response to that. It's just we heard a lot of the comments that similar comments that you just made when we were going through the Union Congregational Church application. And I wanted to say that we did our best to convey, the desires of the neighborhood and what you were looking for to the church, to their real estate folks, and frankly, to the many people that came in and made inquiries. And ultimately, we didn't, choose who gets to, comes forward with an application. But I think even elements of this project, while it may not be the product you were looking for, I think they've done a pretty good job of responding to a lot of the concerns about the height by limiting parts of it to 3 stories, setting it back so that it's in the lower part of the property. Again, I think I can see elements of what we heard reflected in this plan, even though it's maybe not exactly the product that you were looking for.
Yep, and we just have another comment supporting what Luke was saying, saying that large density apartments would be inappropriate for this small neighborhood.
Laura, it looks like Nate has his hand raised.
Hey, it's a two-part question, but I don't think they're long. This meeting's does feel final. And so I guess it does feel like this is more of a check the box. You're informing us of the plan that's moving forward. So just verifying that. And then just really wanted to understand a little bit more about what I would find in the long range comprehensive plan regarding density. Do you have current density, and then where you want the density to be? Like when we go and direct us to that long range comprehensive plan, can we have some idea of what that looks like at the end, regardless of specific sites? To Luke's point of a very small neighborhood and what the city's vision is for how many people you want to put in here.
Yeah, both good questions, and I'm trying to think how to visualize the second part of that. But first, I'll start with the beginning. So nothing is final at this point. But we do have a formal application now. I think back in October when we had I think it was October, maybe it was earlier, had our first neighborhood meeting. We did not have a formal application. After that meeting, we conducted the traffic study, and I think it was just last week, we received the formal application from the applicant. And the requests are for a comprehensive plan amendment. So right now the site is guided civic, and they're requesting a change to high density residential. That high density residential land use category allows up to 50 units per acre. And so 30 units per acre that they're proposing here is at the lower end of that category. And then they're requesting a rezoning for a planned unit development to allow them some flexibility on some of the setbacks on the property. And that's ultimately on the north side and the east side of the site primarily, trying to push the building farther away from the residential, single family residential to the west. Although there may be other factors we have not yet identified. And then lastly, there's a plat involved, which is basically just establishing the property boundaries for the new development. It is not final, so as I said, we're just getting started. We just have a formal application. Not that this hasn't been on our radar, but the formal process is just beginning. We're trying to update folks kind of where we stand today. Over the next several weeks, staff will be doing a review not only of the completeness of the application, but trying to identify if there's any missing applications, if there's any utility issues, if there's any improvements that can be made to the site plan to better align with our city code. Eventually, what will happen is we'll schedule a public hearing that will go to the Planning Commission. It's possible that there will be changes to the plan either in response to staff comments or a response to the input that we get this evening. And that's really at the discretion of the developer. We hold the public hearing at the Planning Commission. They are an advisory group that make recommendations to the City Council. They hold the public hearing, take public input, and then they can recommend approval, denial. They can recommend changes to the plan based on the inputs that come through. And then ultimately it goes to City Council, usually 2 to 4 weeks later, for them to consider the application. Right now, the public hearing, we're targeting somewhere around mid-March to late March, and possibly early April for that to occur. I'm trying to gather my thoughts if there was something else on the process. So again, I want to just iterate that staff's recommendations, the developer's proposal is not necessarily the final. There are opportunities for there to be changes throughout that process. The other thing I'll mention is just the deadline. So we do have a deadline at the city. Once we have a complete application, we need to complete our review, and the city needs to take action on an item within 60 days or 120 days. And in this case, we are expecting to have to extend to a full up to 120 days. So we will not complete that process in 60. With that, I'm going to try to circle back to your question about the long range plan. It's difficult to, I think if you look at our land use plan in the comprehensive plan, that's probably the best source. And I can point to you where to find that. If you go to our city website, there's a tab that's called Our City. And then the very first item, I think, is the 2040 comprehensive plan. And if you go to the land use plan, you'll find kind of what the area is guided for. You'll also find some growth projections in land use, the percentage of land use that's used for various purposes. And then lastly, it's really buried. That's why I think the Elmwood neighborhood traffic audit will be more useful for you. In our mobility chapter, which is our transportation chapter, there is what's called a transportation analysis zone map, TAZ map, and also a table that lays out all the growth that's projected for households, residential, etc. But the neighborhood traffic audit probably provides that in a little easier, more digestible way for the Elmwood neighborhood specifically. Sorry, I can get long-winded. I apologize.
All right, thank you, Sean. We have a question in the chat asking, Sean, is the location of the south entry to the garage along Wooddale in the best location, or could the curb cut be located more in line with Cambridge Avenue?
Yeah, that's a good question. My first look at this was that I would like to see if we can move the entrance, the south entrance, farther south to align with Cambridge. Primarily because I think it would avoid some of the nuisance for the single family house that would, be pretty close to lining up with that driveway. But we have not forwarded that kind of initial comment to the developer yet for a response, but I appreciate that comment and question.
All right, and it looks like Luke has his hand up again. Luke, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. I just had a couple more, I guess, for you, Mr. Walther. So, you were speaking to what it takes, that this isn't final yet. So what does it take for the city to look at something and be like, all right, this probably isn't the best, use of this land considering, how much small of a neighborhood it is? I mean, where is it along the path where you're like, all right, maybe we should consider something else? And, and as far as the product, I'm not looking for any product. First of all, I don't want it, if nothing there is going to make the neighborhood any better. It's just going to make it worse. So as far as a product, I guess an apartment is a product. I don't know. I mean, I wouldn't consider it a product. It's more of a living environment. But yeah, where in it does the city say, all right, this probably isn't the best use of the land in the neighborhood? Is there anywhere along the line that happens?
Good question, Luke. I think staff certainly provides some guidance to the property owners, to the real estate folks, to the developers that come in. We try to steer them a certain direction based on our guidance and our plan or the feedback that we have from the neighborhood. But ultimately, when an application comes in, we do need to pursue what they've provided and make a determination about whether or not to support it. Staff hasn't made a formal recommendation, but I can say that at this time, we're not seeing anything that would, be an absolute, negative for this site to change to this. However, staff and I am not the final decision maker. The Planning Commission has an opportunity to weigh in that. They're made up of 6 or 7 local residents, and they provide recommendations to the council, and then the council ultimately makes the decision. And they are requesting a comprehensive plan amendment and a rezoning to allow for this development, and those are completely discretionary decisions. So the hard part is, with this guided as civic, that's a pretty limiting use, and so there is some room for us to consider an alternative, because that is really just reflecting the current use of the property. And if the church is going away and they are looking to sell, I think we do need to entertain alternative uses. I see that Blake's hand raised as well.
Yes. Blake, go ahead.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it. Blake Chafee, live on Cambridge Street, just down the road from the proposed development. And I guess, a lot of folks talk about the same thing, but I guess I would say that pretty equal to what I did back in October whenever we met, and no ill will towards the developer, right? They're doing what developers do. No harm, no foul. I think, my comments are more for the elected officials, like, Sean had just pointed out. And I do want to say, because I think Lynette is on here, I want to thank Lynette for being so prompt with, her responses. As we've gone back and forth on this project for weeks and months now. And I just want to thank her for being really attentive and really responsive. But you know, just say again, I think the project is just a little bit obscene. We're trying to put, you know, 10 pounds of potatoes in a 5-pound sack. Density is just too much. You know, we're looking at turning Cambridge and Goodrich into racetracks. And I will tell you, I think the traffic from folks living or visiting at that facility is going to far outpace the cut through traffic that existed a few years back. And that was pretty intense, you know, to the point where we didn't want our 2 little girls to play in the front yard. It was a serious concern of ours. And that's why we were happy to see that frontage road closed. You know, I don't, you know, care much for what the facility is. I mean, low, high, $1 million condos. I just think the density is too much. I really do, and I would urge the elected folks on this call to think about it again and not support it, and maybe go back to the drawing board and entertain something that's more reasonable. I know there's a process to go through here because you have an application. I understand that. I would just encourage folks to look at something different. You know, folks overwhelmingly want to own something. They want to build wealth, right? They want to build generational wealth. And I would hope that the city would look at investing in ownership opportunities. You know, single family might not be the best case there, but there are other things to do. There are other opportunities out there. And I guess I don't know. I appreciate that staff have listened. You know, it sounds like they looked at the feedback, and I'll tell you, I feel like we got ignored. That our feedback was ignored, and that's disappointing. I guess the project is just not particularly reasonable.
All right, thank you, Blake. We have a few questions in the chat, so I'd like to hit a few of those before we get to our next raised hand. Sean, there are a few questions regarding the future land use, and some folks want to know why the property shouldn't be kept as civic, and others just wanted to point out that it is guided right now as civic, and maybe if you could explain the comp plan amendment process a little bit.
Sure, I can try to do that. So the civic category is usually used for just churches and schools, or maybe city buildings. So it's pretty restrictive as far as the breadth of uses that are allowed. And yes, it could remain civic, but honestly, we're not seeing a lot of growth in a lot of these churches around here, and sadly, we're seeing a number of them that are shrinking. And so I don't know that there's a market for a new church to occupy the space, but I think that the current owners are just looking for an exit strategy at this point because they need to downsize, is my understanding.
All right, thank you. We have a question for the development team. With 235 total bedrooms, how many residents do you project that this property will have when at full capacity?
You know, that's a good question. That's not necessarily easy to answer. We have a total of 114 units, and we have about, I think, in the range of 75% 2 and 3 bedroom units. So, you know, I would say, you know, we could have anywhere from, 250-ish, to, as high as in the upper 200s, residents living at the building. It's kind of hard to predict.
All right, thank you.
And Blaine, I don't know if you have any additional perspective on that. I don't have the math in front of me at the moment to break all of that down, but.
Sorry, those estimates seem reasonable to me, Alex.
Okay.
All right, thanks. We have a question about traffic, as far as the traffic, perhaps the traffic study or traffic audit. For that, what was considered on Cambridge? Was the industrial area on Cambridge taken into account? as well as potential light rail traffic from the Louisiana station for the future.
Thanks for the question, Dale. So the growth that might happen outside of your neighborhood was factored in only through kind of the regional and the Hennepin County wide system expansion, so that we incorporated in our comprehensive plan, along with projections for the Elmwood neighborhood and the traffic analysis zones for your neighborhood. We've done that for the entire city. And so we do have growth projections for the Louisiana area as well, and any land use turnovers that may happen there. So that would have been factored in that broader model. But the methodology and the description beyond that, I think I'd want to defer to our traffic consultant at a later time.
All right, and we have just a couple more quick questions in the chat, and then Luke will get to your raised hand in a moment. First, we have a question if what the total number of 3, 2, and 1 bedroom units are I was wondering if Blaine, you could share those slides again so everyone can see the unit count. And while he's pulling that up, we have another question. This is probably more for Sean. Why doesn't the city entertain building single family homes where people can actually build equity for themselves? So is there any possibility for single family development on this site or elsewhere?
Maybe yeah, I think the slide probably speaks for itself, so I'll jump in and try to respond to that. Currently, the zoning of the site is R3, which is which allows for 1 and 2 family residential. And so that is a possibility, but I think it's a remote one on the property of this size, located against Highway 100. I think it's unlikely that this site would compete or do well for single family residential. That's not to say it couldn't happen, it couldn't be done. I just don't think that's likely the people that responded to the property when it was put on the market. And yes, the city is interested in single family generally as well, and affordable single family residential or duplexes or smaller other types of uses. Those are things that we are exploring opportunities to promote citywide, and try to find some opportunities not only for home ownership and affordable home ownership, but also just looking for what some people call missing middle housing, where it's something in between a single family house and an apartment building. The market for that is still being developed. There's not as many developers out there that are creating that product, especially in the condominium and townhome area. Really, that has almost essentially turned off in this market, in this area, partly because at least if you believe the reports in from developers, entirely it comes down to some state law restrictions that require developers that 10 years after completing the project, they're basically on the hook for repairing anything and everything that went wrong in 10 years. And that is a level of risk that developers have not been willing to assume for quite some time.
All right, thank you. We'll jump over to Luke with his hand raised.
All right, thank you again. So this kind of echoes what Blake had previously said. And this is a comment, I guess it's not even a question, but I'd like to ask the mayor and the city council to really think about what they're doing and just put themselves in the people's shoes that live in this neighborhood. I mean, would they, in their neighborhoods in which they live, would they appreciate not just the Aldersgate project, but all the other projects that are going on that will be going on within this small stamp of a neighborhood? Would they appreciate it? I'm guessing no, but maybe I'm wrong. So I would really like for the council and the mayor and other staff to really consider that.
All right, thank you, Luke. We do have another question in the chat. For Sean, the property details bike parking. How will those who bike connect to the city's paths, trails, and bike-friendly streets?
Well, a couple things. We do require ample bike parking in our ordinance. That is one thing that we've generated thousands and thousands of bicycle parking spaces, especially in residential units in the city since we adopting our current code. So there will be ample bike parking provided on this site as a requirement. In addition to that, the local streets here are pretty friendly for bicyclists, and then leading up to the regional trail, of course, the Cedar Lake LRT regional trail. There's opportunities to connect there. I believe the trail picks up just north of the fire station, also along Wooddale, and there's sidewalk provided if folks wanted to make that quick connection from the cul-de-sac over to the trail. There's an opportunity there to extend north. And then, as some of you are probably aware, there's some additional work being done coming up this summer on 36th Street. There's a neighborhood meeting coming up. I think it's next week, maybe 2 options for you to attend virtually to learn more about that project, which will include some bike facilities on 36th Street.
All right, thank you. We had a follow-up on a question about the number of units within our different types of units, if there is any maximum occupancy for the number of residents that are allowed within a 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom, or 3-bedroom. I'm not sure if the developer or Sean is best to answer that.
Yeah, I can address that. So we as a company have basically a standard requirement where the maximum occupants per bedroom are 2. So for a 1-bedroom, it would be 2 individuals. For a 2-bedroom, the max occupants are 4. And for a 3-bedroom, it would be 6.
All right, thank you. And then we had another question. This was probably for Sean, maybe to give a broad overview. Maybe this is something we could go a little further into detail at the Planning Commission, but Blake was wondering if you could walk through the financing for this and discuss any public funding and tax incentives that are being requested or proposed.
Sure. Actually, I think I'd rather have Alex respond to that first, and I can add on to it if needed.
Yeah, thanks, Sean and Laura. So the project is being financed, proposed to be financed, I should say, with a tax-exempt bond allocation, the 4% low-income housing tax credits, and we are requesting subsidy from the city in the form of either tax increment financing or funding via the Housing Trust Fund. So that is just the the overall capital stack right now that we have proposed for the project.
Any other questions? Before folks cut away, there's still some time for folks to add questions or raise their hand and ask the question. But as maybe a start to concluding the meeting, I just wanted to highlight that I understand that these virtual meetings aren't ideal for many. And I know that there are several residents that wanted this to be in person. I'm sorry that we couldn't make that happen. But I would like to offer that I am willing to meet with a small group or individuals in person following this meeting, and you're welcome to contact me to do so. and I'd be happy to follow up and answer any questions that you have and listen to you if you're not comfortable speaking in this environment, or maybe if you know folks that were not participants in this meeting that wanted to meet in person and just unable to attend. I'm happy to do that. And again, this session will be, it has been recorded and it will be provided on the city website under the project page. I think I saw one more question.
Yep, we actually have two more. Blake had a follow-up question, wondering, Sean, if you could explain TIF and what the trust fund is that was mentioned.
I can begin to start, and I might have to defer and respond. Actually, I have a volunteer, which is great. I could try to hazard my way through it, but I think Karen Barton, our community development director, would do a better job of that. Thanks, Karen.
I'm muted. Okay. Hi, Karen Barton, Community Development Director. So tax increment financing is a tool that we use that captures the added tax capacity above the base taxes for a property to provide back to the developer for to assist in offsetting the gap financing for the project. So the base taxes on the property continue to be paid as they were, but the added value from the new development causes the taxes to increase, and so that amount is captured, and a portion of that is given back to the developer. And that's based on our financial consultants taking a look at what is actually needed to make the project financially viable. The Affordable Housing Trust Fund is monies that we have available to provide to certain developments that are providing affordable housing. And that also can be used to offset that gap in the pro forma to make the development financially feasible. So in a nutshell, that's what it is. So both of them.
Thank you, Karen. I see another question here was about the sidewalk along Wooddale and how that might be impacted adjacent to this site and the surface parking. So right now there's a sidewalk existing. It's at back of curb. It's right up against the back of the curb of the road. The surface parking is actually set back quite a ways. I think we'll be having some conversations. Typically with new sidewalk, we would be building detached from the curb. We'd have up to a 6-foot boulevard and then a 6-foot sidewalk. Right now, that hasn't been proposed to be changed, but it may be something that the city requests. The other alternative too is that we've been exploring is if there's any opportunity to look at the landscaping and ability to maybe provide some berming or something along those lines that would help screen the parking from the neighborhood. But essentially, there will be a sidewalk. It will remain. The question is, will it remain exactly in the location it's at, or will it be reconstructed more to the city's current designs? So more to come on that. I'm sorry, there were some follow-up questions on TIF. I'm not surprised. Karen, do you mind taking those as well? I'll read those off to you. One is the delta is captured from where for TIF?
So the original property value of the property, so taxes are paid on that amount. They have been paid on that value. They will continue to be paid on that value. And that's split up between the city, the county, and the school district. The amount so the new development increases the property value. And so the difference between that original tax capacity and the new tax capacity based on the new value is what a portion of that is captured. And then that is paid to the developer based on costs, eligible costs for that development that offset the financial gap that the development has demonstrated. And it's for a period of time. It's not indefinite. It could be, 5 years, 8 years, 10 years. But when that's paid off, then the full amount of the taxes go on to the tax rolls and again, the full amount goes to the split up between the city, the county, and the school district, the state.
And Karen, there was a kind of a follow-up question, based on the fact that this is currently owned by a church. How will the base level of the property taxes be determined?
Good question. Because, with a nonprofit ownership, such as a church, they currently don't pay taxes, but there is a shadow value that is assessed or associated with the property that is used to set the base amount for the taxes.
All right, thank you. And it looks like we have another hand raised. Luke, you can go ahead.
Thank you. This is, I guess, a follow-up to what Mr. Walter said a little while ago regarding having this. It would have been better having this meeting in person. I would agree with that. I would think that, the democratic process, I mean, obviously we can have people here and they can ask questions, but it's not the same. And I would hope in the future, and I guess this would be for more of the city council and the mayor, that meetings like this in the future would be taking place in person, according, the city ordinances at that time.
All right, thank you. Are there any further questions that folks have?
Could I just add one thing to that?
Yes,
I
of course.
noticed that the mayor has turned his camera on. I'm not sure if he's looking to speak, but just a quick response to that. One thing I would highlight, Luke, is that through the pandemic, one thing we've experienced is that the turnouts for these virtual meetings tend to be much higher than we did with the in-person, and it does remove some of the barriers that folks had with childcare and things like that, or travel, that weren't there before. So we do, when we can, when we're not in an emergency order, try to provide opportunities in multiple fashions for people to provide input. And so I don't see that we would have these virtual meetings go away, but we might have hybrid options in the future too. So thank you. And Mayor, were you looking to speak?
I wasn't looking to. I just, when Luke expressed his concern that maybe this wasn't direct enough, I just wanted to make sure that he knew I was here. I'm listening and paying attention. So whether it's on a phone call, on a Zoom call, in person, I hear the message. So I just wanted to make sure that he heard that.
Thank you, Mayor.
Yeah.
All right, and we have some additional comments or questions about impact on property values, as well as if the development is occupied at that full occupancy. Some back of the napkin math, around 470 folks would be the maximum number of residents.
Alex, maybe you want to start with maybe, I think you were highlighting the maximum number, but maybe you could talk a little more about that element, and maybe even the other element of your experience with impact on property values around your projects, or projects like yours.
Yeah, I'd be happy to address both those. So, that standard that we have is, again, it's a maximum number of residents that can live on a per bedroom basis in a 1, 2, and 3 bedroom unit. We've never hit that max throughout our buildings. when I had kind of commented on 250 to 300 potential residents, I think realistically, closer to 300 is probably, a more reasonable number. It could even potentially be in the low 300s. Again, it's difficult to gauge. I get that the maximum number is in the fours, but again, we don't reach the maximum number of occupants, or even really get close to that number in our buildings.
Yeah.
And then the other one was related to property value. Sorry. So property values, I mean, what we've seen, generally speaking, and looking at other projects that we've developed and just in general and seeing high density development and multifamily development in communities is that it definitely does not reduce property values of surrounding homes and surrounding properties in the area. Frankly, from information that we've reviewed and data that we've seen, we frankly have seen the opposite effect overall in general to property values. So we don't believe that developing a high density or a medium to high density multifamily project, whether it's considered a workforce housing or a market rate housing project, necessarily would detract from property values.
Well, we're at about an hour and 15 minutes. I'm going to maybe make a last call for any additional questions folks wanted to ask. There is a question about, I think this is directed to the developer. Would you consider cutting back on the number of units if you don't see full occupancy?
Would we consider if we don't see full occupancy?
Yes, that's how it's phrased.
Okay, I guess I don't fully understand the question. We started off at our design initially when we first proposed to the city, with a 4-story building on all sides. And I forgot the exact unit count at that point, but I think it was around 124. So when we scaled the building down in terms of density, we reduced that unit count by 10 or so units, and then we reduced kind of the longer, more dominant portion of the building to 3 stories. And from a financial feasibility standpoint, we've done rigorous financial modeling on this, and losing more density would just really make the project not financially feasible, based on what we're proposing to build. So from an occupancy standpoint, what I can tell you is that there's significant demand for workforce housing in St. Louis Park and throughout the Twin Cities. And at the end of the day, the buildings that we've built that are similar in other communities are almost 100% pre-leased before the doors open. So we fully anticipate that this property will be fully occupied and have stable occupancy over time.
I think your response answered some of the follow-up questions. I think that, just from what I can read from the questions, it looks like there is just that vacancy rate, the turnover time period that might have been part of her question. And then there was a follow-up on the housing value question, which was, does the data regarding housing value, how does the data regarding housing value compare the rate of growth? Sorry, just moved on me. The rate of growth or increase in values for the areas with high density versus those that don't have high density?
Off the top of my head, I don't really have a direct answer for you on that. I mean, we've more so looked at some general data that pulls, within, a radius of higher density projects and home value trends over a period of time. We haven't necessarily compared that to a bunch of other pockets or areas of town that don't have a project like that next to them. But what we've seen is increased property values. So I guess I don't have like a perfect answer for that, but that's what we've seen in the data that we've looked at.
All right, we have a hand raised. Linda, go ahead.
Yeah, this is John Enright. My wife had to step away. So I was the one that had the question regarding the housing values for neighborhoods with high density versus not. It was Alex, it was back to your earlier statement of, the data you saw, you haven't seen negative in property values for areas where you've expanded your areas or opened your facilities. But in this relative time frame, everybody's housing value's gone up. So that was the purpose of my question is, do you have data that shows what happened to the property values for neighborhoods where you had a new high density apartment facility move in compared to areas that don't have a high density? Have they grown at the same levels?
We don't have that data.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Thank you all for your questions and attentiveness throughout the meeting today. Really appreciate it. I really enjoy working with the Elmwood neighborhood. And again, I want to extend the offer to meet with any of you in person if you'd like. Again, if you visit our city website and the project page, both Laura and my contact information is provided there, and we'd be happy to circle back with you. With that, I'll give it one more last call and maybe offer any council members that want to, if there was any statements to be made, but I think they were attending mainly to listen and hear the input from the neighborhood. Wonderful. Well, thank you all. And again, please watch the project page or contact us if you have any questions about the next steps. And as soon as we know specific dates for the public hearing, we will offer those. And I do see the mayor raising his hand.
Thank you, Sean. For those of you who are on here, and I know Councilmember Dumoulin and Councilmember Budd, our contact information is on the city's website. My email is pretty straightforward, jspano@stlouispark.org, and I've got a direct dial there. Feel free to give me a call or shoot me an email if you want to sit down and talk more about any of this. But I appreciate the opportunity to sit in. I was going to sit in on, I think, the last meeting, and I got called away at the last second. So I'm glad that I could at least get a chance to kind of see what's being proposed and see the sort of questions that are being raised by the neighborhood, which Councilmember Dumoulin has shared some of that with me. So I've gotten a bit of a sense of kind of what we're hearing in the neighborhood, but it's good to be able to see it firsthand and hear from you all. So just wanted to flag that if folks want to follow up, they can. Thanks, Sean.
Thank you. All right. Well, with that, I will adjourn and thank you all for the time this evening that you set aside to learn more about the project and share your input. Have a great day.